And we are live again. Hello, Joshua. How are you doing?
Jens, great to see you and happy Friday. Good to be live on another Reverse Mentor Friday session and, of course, Flat Cap Friday as well.
Yes, exactly. Let's get the banner rolling. So this for everyone tuning into our live session today, this is the Reverse Mentors Friday where Joshua and I discuss different topics on reverse mentorship. So it's all about generational learning and how we see the world changing and how we believe and how we look into how leaders of today can learn from the leaders of tomorrow. That's what it is all about. And of course, we have as well a podcast, which is the Reverse Mentor Lab. Let's switch the streamer here. So the podcast is the Reverse Mentor Lab. If you're interested in um, getting more from us like this, there's an audio version, there's a video version in YouTube. So it's all about that. Yes, Joshua, what are we talking about today?
Super intro, Jens, and I'm going to just zoom in quickly on the word learn because that's what we've got lined up for today. So the theme and the broad discussion that we're going to kick off today is around learning by giving. And I think sometimes when you think about learning, we often think about having to do that in a formal setting where we are being taught something. But today we're really going to be talking about how can we learn by giving. And there's a great saying that it is, in giving that we receive. And I think that there's really something fundamental and important to think about inside of that space. So, Jens, I'm going to maybe ask you, do you have a story for us that you can share about where you've given and how you've learned in return?
Yeah, I was just thinking, like, I'm giving so much. Let me think. So if we go to the corporate world, it's for me it's so natural. That's why it's hard to put something out that's even at least a little bit interesting for the listeners. But let's go a little bit into my coaching world and in my corporate background where I was working in corporates on looking into what I did and how I did things, and then with the intention to give the whole time and not to take, which I do as now as a business naturally. But let's go more into my old me. So working in a large corporation, giving to my team. If we just really go on small zoom in perspective. So I was manager of a small team, and what I did and what I still today believe is the right thing to do is I was tuning into every person and was looking into how how do you feel well in a team? How do you feel well in an organization? That was my number one priority. So I was spending a lot of time with the team members one on one in dialing into what are they about, what are they longing for, what is important to them. And due to that, I was giving the most precious thing, and that might sound silly right now. I was giving time to them. I was giving tremendous time to them in the beginning and over years. Um, as a crazy busy manager working in different parts of the world, giving time was for me the most precious thing because I'm a nerd when it comes to this. More for everyone who is interested in Tim Ferriss, the 4 Hour Work Week. That's my world. That's how I think, and some people hate that. Hi guys. Uh, so it's really all about how can you be most effective with the time you have, because that's the most limiting factor in life is the time you have. So how do you spend it most valuable? So going back to that case, is it was about giving time, spending time, and really tuning in on, hey, how can I support you to be successful and you to be truly yourself? That's what it was. And what I got back in return was, I mean, of course, loyalty and all that topics, but it was all about team. How do you create a team that's happy to work together? How do you create a relationship between you as a new manager with a person that don't know you, that don't know where you come from? And for me, in the other way around, the same way. So that's just a small example where I gave a lot of time and got back a lot of loyalty, a lot of, business outcomes due to that, and so on.
So if you just double click on that word time quickly, and I think sometimes when we think about giving is that we necessarily think it has to be something tangible. And by that, I mean, if you think about giving to charity, you either give a financial contribution or you go and do work for a charity. But I think if you think about the word time and just getting to know people, you're giving of your time. And I think that there's a phenomenal amount that can be given back to you by doing that giving of time. And I think sometimes, especially in this digital world, at times we don't necessarily think about and quantify the time that we need to do things. We all think about just doing things, and to be actively doing something, you think that you're then being productive. And I've challenged inside of this reverse mentor setting before is for young thinkers to think about the difference between busy and productive, and what does that mean going forward. And I think that that's another rabbit hole that we can look to go down at a different stage. But I really loved just the way that you emphasize the time that you give to people to get to know them, and to also get people to trust you, I guess, inside of a managerial position.
Yeah, absolutely. So turning around the question, what did you learn by giving something?
So I sort of think about this, and obviously having grown up inside of the information age predominantly, I've thought about it in two ways. So the first is around giving to receive. And if you think about that, it's much in terms of thinking around the creator economy. So when you create, what are you creating for? What is the purpose that you're doing that with and for? And if you think about, often when we think about building businesses, is you're doing it to achieve something, and you're trying to extract as much value as you can by creating that business. But what if we flip that on its head? And I think that I've certainly learned that in the biggest possible way early on in my career, is where I approach things as sort of saying, I'm creating with this task in mind. How can I share what I'm doing so that others can learn from what I'm doing inside of that space, from the mistakes I'm making, or maybe from the questions that I'm asking. And I think that sort of shift that happened inside of me when I did that, there was a big sort of unlock inside of my own mind, which then started to show the importance of being humble, the importance of engaging with empathy and things like that. So the biggest lesson for me there was really around, when you go about creating something, share what you're creating, because others can learn from either the mistakes that you are making or from the steps in the right direction that you're taking. The other side of things came, and it's again a bit of a charity example here, is where I gave my time towards the charity that I was working with at the time. And I think that was one of the biggest things where it gave a significant unlock to me, is because I think, like I mentioned earlier, is when we think about giving, sometimes we equate it to tangible things or to monetary examples. But if you just give of your time to help something be achieved, or to help something get taken to the next level, you're helping someone that is outside of your immediate realm of responsibility. So in giving my time to that charity and the influence that it had, I may never meet that person, but it gave a huge amount back to me just by the simple nature of giving something that it's the overused phrase maybe is, bigger than yourself. So if you give something that is far bigger than yourself, you'll be amazed about what the impact that can truly have.
Yeah, so important. I would like to double click on the mistakes and sharing from your failures, because we're living in a time where, if you are in business, everyone knows that, everyone says that even, but nobody's doing it still. And I was discussing it yesterday with a person, where we digged into that as well a little bit. So why is that? And what we came up with was a little bit of, hey, we're in a, if we think about corporate setting, but I think it's the same in a non-corporate setting. So we're living in a world where everyone is saying you can do failures, and yes, it's fine to learn from them. But if you're in a corporate setting, let's say if you're the CEO of a large corporation, if you fail in the outside perspective, and outside means everyone else than the CEO, him or herself, then this person is kind of a person non grata. It's like, hey, you did this wrong, and you should not do this again. So we don't want to work with you anymore because you did that wrong. And that can be something very dramatically wrong, and that can be something ethically not wrong or whatever it is. It can be different versions of being wrong or mistakes you do. In the end, is we always put people on a kind of, how do you say, pedestal? That's the right word in English, where everyone sees the CEO as, hey, this is a person that's not a person. It's like the guru that's the shiny object where everyone says, hey, this person is not allowed to fail. And that can be in personal life or business life, whatever. I think we need to go back into a world where we're all people. Everyone is failing every day in small things or in large things. And I get it from a corporate perspective that if a person is doing something extremely wrong from a society perspective, that this is not good. But in the end, we need to look back and, hey, we're all people, and we should be allowed to fail in public as well. It's just having the humility as a person, but then as well as a company to say, hey, yes, you failed. We still believe in you because you're not a different person than you have been before we have been knowing this.
Yeah, so Jens, have you heard of the phrase participatory budgeting?
No.
So essentially, it's just a broad phrase, and it's not used directly in terms of understanding learning by giving. But what you said there made me think of it, because essentially it talks about how different people, and it's more collective, need to have a view and a say on how a budget is spent. So if you think about this in a physical setting, in a nation state setting, you may have different members of the community, and that's why we vote at the end of the day, is because we vote and we place our vote of confidence with the best political party that we think will make the best political decisions going forward. But now, what if we take a step back from that and we say, inside of this space that we're doing, and if we zoom in on corporations, how do you make spaces for people to learn by giving? So how do you enable young thinkers inside of a corporation to actually learn by giving of their time or by giving of their views to specific topics that maybe inside of a traditional org structure, where you've got different hierarchies, that way of thinking isn't necessarily front of mind. And I think that when you think about participation, collaboration, that is all forming and sort of becomes sort of like a melting pot for learning inside of different environmental settings. And particularly when you think, like you mentioned, inside corporations, how can we potentially shift our way of thinking where allowing young thinkers and generational thinking to happen, so participation, to essentially be then utilized in terms of the way of thinking or pushing that organization inside of a different direction, or potentially also looking at a solution to a problem that they're facing by just allowing people to contribute.
Yeah, I would like to take this to the next level. So if we approach it from which we're all about, how can leaders of today learn from leaders of tomorrow? If we turn this around and say, hey, young leaders out there, and you're one of them, how can you utilize this opportunity of, we are in an age where you can engage with everyone on the planet if you want to. And maybe not in a physical setting, but you can literally reach out to everyone in the whole world if you want to. So if you're a young leader, how can a young leader approach this as an opportunity rather than saying, hey, yeah, it's all not good, we need to, and I need to be allowed to speak? What do you think?
I think it's a big question, and we're going to need longer than 15 minutes for me to try and unpack this, but I'll do my best. So one of the ways that I sort of approach this is around saying, what can I do for you, rather than thinking about what can you do for me. So if you think about that from an engagement perspective, immediately if you shift that around and you think about, as a young thinker, what could I potentially do? If we take the two people on the call today, Jens, what could I do for you inside of our engagement? And I think so often when you think about the initial engagement is that people want, when you reach out to someone, you're already doing it with an intention. Are you doing it with an intention to want or to take something that they can do for you? Or are you offering your service inside of that space? And I think that inside of this world that we now live in, this information age, it's really great that we've got this access, and you can hop into the DMs on Twitter, LinkedIn, TikTok, Clubhouse now even, and ask people that you may never meet in person for a 15-minute coffee chat or something like that. But as a young thinker, the way that I approach it is, what can I do for you, rather than saying, what can you do for me? And I think that that's fundamentally different to a way that a lot of people think about that engagement inside of this digital age. I think another thing to think about inside of that is, the leaders of tomorrow, and this is maybe a challenge and a point of inspiration for a few people, is saying, when you think about connecting, we live in this world now where we've got this huge amount of access. But what do you do with that access? What do you do from making time to actually distill and understand that access? And that sort of links back to this notion of collaboration, participation, all of those types of things, is try and make the circle a bit bigger. So don't only do things for yourself, because it's that whole notion of learning by giving, again, is coming back into this way of thinking and saying, so often I think we do things just for ourselves. We reach out, I reach out to Jens, or I reach out to Dennis, or to Vanna, or to Lina, or whoever it is that we both know as mutual people in our circle. But how do we enable those people to also reach out? How do we empower? And it's discussions that we've had in other circles. But I think that that's something that needs to happen, because it increases the participation, and more participation is great. But then again, take a step back, create that space to actually interpret, to think through what those decisions are that you've made and how that you can then use those going forward.
Yeah. And I think that's also a skill you can develop, because it's, if we call it corporate style, that's community management. And we discussed this just this week. It's a skill that you can develop. I mean, I'm a kind of connector, where it's like a person that has learned to connect a lot of people. And I've learned that from my dad very, very long time ago, because that's how he was as a natural person. And he didn't like to do it, especially not the last years in his professional career, at least, because he was hanging out too much with too many people his whole life. But the whole thing I want to go into is like, it's a skill. If you're a young leader and if you want to get into that, you need to start doing it. It's a skill you can learn. You get better in doing it. You get better in connecting to people one-on-one, but as well, you get better in connecting to people and connecting other peoples to you and with you and without you. And that's where it comes. It's like on different levels. First, it's a mindset where you need to say, okay, I'm going in to give. It's not about what I take out of it. And then it's about, how do I learn to do that? How do I learn to give is one part, but then it's, how do I learn to utilize that mindset in connecting to other people and building a relationship? And that's important from a personal level, but even more important, no, it's not more important, but it's, if you go into the business world, that's the number one thing. The whole business world, as higher you get in an organization, it's all about relationships. This is the true like gold of what you have. It's about relationships the whole time. I have been in my whole life, everything in my career that made me successful was through relationships. Yes, I did work okay, that people picked me up and dragged me to the next level, but in the end, it was through relationships that I was getting onto the radar. And that's the same now with my businesses. It's all about relationships again. Say, how are you visible? How do people engage with you? How do you engage with people? And then you build a relationship. And someday someone says, "Hey, I would like to hire you. I would like to work with you as a consultant, as a coach, whatever it is." So that's why I truly believe it is a skill to be developed. And I'm still on my journey to learn it. You learn every day, like we always say.
Yeah, and I love that, Jens. And sort of maybe just to encourage people to think about the way that they connect with things. And again, using that phrase of what can I do for you instead of what can you do for me. So one of the biggest things that I've learned, and I love that story and that learning that you shared from your dad, is around saying, when I engage with people and when I put myself in situations where I might not necessarily feel as competent or as comfortable, it's more on saying, what connections can we build out in that space to enable the network to grow? So, I've been asked in many situations, what is it that you want to achieve and how do you want to go about doing that? And I say it's all about really just linking up these different connections and then seeing how you can connect the two inside of that space, or connect the three, or connect the four. what does that look like longer term, and how does that potentially compound? And I think that's quite a different mindset shift, but also a different model shift if you think about business creation inside of that space. Because if you go back to sort of the way that traditional organizations have been structured, yes, there are relationships and there's sort of a closed network that's developed. But how does that network now start being broken up by access points, by democratization, by decentralization? What does that mean for new models and for different generations coming into that space? And I'm going to use that as a bit of a segue to talk to something that we agreed to do last time at the end of this live session, was bring it back down, because Jens and I like prototyping, but we also like being practical in some of the things that we do. And Jens, before we started recording, you joked that you've been in a bit of a bubble this week, and you've really been in full on production mode, which I can see, and I'm really looking forward to the live courses that you've got coming out next week. But it's really around communication, connectivity, and some different ways of thinking that we've been chatting about today. And for those listening, and those, whether you're listening live or to the recorded session, you'll no doubt have used email today or yesterday or earlier this week. And email has become one of those things that's really utilized for communication with inside organizations. And so, Jens, you've been around inside big corporates and also starting your own business and connecting different people. Email's very much at the heart of that in terms of a direct form of communication. But I read an interesting article this week where it was saying, could Gen Z help rid the world of this dreaded thing we call email? And I know that certain people wake up in the morning and see they've got 100 new emails in their inbox and sort of just do this with their head and close their eyes and not want to go and open it. So what are your thoughts around how we can potentially look at different forms of communication? What are your thoughts about email?
Yeah, going back to my old me, which always sounds weird. Now, I was one of the people who got so many emails, and sometimes it was like 200 emails per day. It was nuts. And going literally back to what I said in this live stream, Tim Ferriss, The 4-Hour Workweek, something of one of the best books out there. It's fairly old. I think it's, what is it, 12, 15 years old. He speaks about emails and how you use them efficiently as well. And I think that's something we all still need to learn. I mean, email is around for, I don't know, 20 years. We still don't know how to use it efficiently. So that's one part. One part is how do you reduce the amount of emails that will not get rid of them, but it will at least. I managed that with the Tim Ferriss strategies, which he's mentioning in his book, to get half of the emails, which is already awesome. If you go from 200 to 100, it helps a lot, believe me. But then it's really looking into what are the different ways to communicate what and how. And that's something and maybe that's also going into the age where I'm in, and I'm maybe too old for it already. No, I'm never. But it's maybe also a generational shift where which goes back to our stories, is if you're not tuned into the different ways of communicating. And if we just take the things I communicate right now, it's social media on all channels. It's WhatsApp. I have 2 WhatsApp numbers. I text messages, emails. Like, so you have so many ways of communication. Phone calls is still there, Zoom calls, different other video calls. So what is the best way for what? And that's, I think, we're not really, if you go back into the corporate setting, you're not utilizing that. And hey, if I have this topic, if I have this problem, if I have this person, I need to do it in that way. We just generalize always, in specifically in organization, because that's the way you do it. You use emails for everything. But maybe for one person, it is better to have a phone call. Maybe for another person, it's better to have a recorded voicemail or recorded video of yourself talking because of time differences. So there are so many things where we, from a business aspect, and myself included, are not there yet to look into, hey, this is the menu we have of opportunities, technology, and so on. And that's working best with that person. And I think if we get towards something like this, the whole communication flow and interactions and engagement will be higher. It's just finding a personalized way of doing that. That's my short 2 cents.
Yeah, lots of cool things raised, and it's definitely got my mind running. And sort of where I come to is around the word efficiency that you mentioned. And I think sometimes human nature, when we think about efficiency, we try to optimize everything and we try to sort of streamline everything. But inside streamlining everything, we learn to ignore what's happening outside of that, and that's not necessarily always good. Because if you use the example that you said around, you've got email, you've got WhatsApp, and you've got social media channels, you can be having conversations with different people inside of all of those. And how do you create an interoperable platform that allows all of those different communication channels to come together? And going back to that word efficiency and streamline, is I think email in the past, is because it was new, it was novel, it was then used for many things, and it's now just being pushed on to a number of other things, is because people haven't necessarily thought through, okay, how am I doing this? Why am I doing it? And what purpose is it serving? Yeah. And I think that, younger generations can potentially help different generations inside organizations think differently about the ways of communication. But I mean, then we'll go into all sorts of rabbit holes about IT policies and, what's allowed and what's not allowed. And, I don't want to bore people with that, because I'm sure they've got a bit too much going on in their head to consider that. And that's the boring stuff. But the real thing that why I raised email is because I think it talks to a deeper level of communication. And I think when we connect virtually like this, is a lot of people will just do it by emails. And you may be familiar with that term of hiding behind an email. If you've got a problem with a person, or if you want to communicate something quickly, you don't always have to send an email. And maybe a good question to ask is, sometimes I ask myself this question is, do I really need to send that email? Or can I pick up the phone, or can I send a text message? And so I think those are just some of the questions that you can maybe ask yourself to help you think about the way that you use email, because I don't think it's going to go away. Although a lot of Generation Z people and that generation coming into the workforce may want it to go away and would rather communicate over WhatsApp or Twitch or TikTok or whatever it is. But I think that it's just maybe inside the different generations inside the organization asking those questions around, does this really need to be an email?
Yeah, that brings us back to the leaders of tomorrow. You have the opportunity to change that. It's just opening that conversation and start doing it differently. And that's just not it's not happening. It's not true. It's just not on a level in the large organization. There's still only email. Maybe now a little bit Teams if we go the Microsoft route. But it's still far away from being. I've been there. We tried to implement like the corporate Facebook and so on. Nobody used it, or only 20 people out of 20,000. It's a long way to go. But I truly believe that the young leaders, like the leaders of tomorrow, and that's the opportunity to step up and take opportunities and go into that and discuss things from a different angle and use different tools. And even if they're not allowed in a corporate setting, I've done that myself. It works. You will not get kicked out. And if then it's not the right corporation for you anyhow.
Yeah, and it's sort of just links back to a conversation, Jens, that we had in a different context this week, just around the right team for you to consider joining, and what is your needs as an individual, and how can you service those by either joining the right team, and rather than following the right company or potentially the right leader, and what can you learn from other people inside of the world around you, and how do you put yourself in those situations to allow that learning to happen. And again, that sort of brings us back to this learning by giving notion. And I think it's extremely powerful when you think about cross-generational learning, as you and I mentioned in a number of settings inside of the Reverse Mentor Lab and in our work with the XYZ Playground and those types of things as well. But I think it's also, you've spoken a lot about the leaders of tomorrow inside of this conversation. And I think there's also something to think about from a leaders of today in terms of learning by giving. And I think that, I've benefited from having mentors and friends who are a lot older than me and have really helped my progression as a thinker and as a person develop, because they've, like you told the story right at the beginning of today's recording, is around that example of just giving your time. Yeah. And I think that young thinkers really appreciate and soak up as much of that time that is given to you and afforded to you by the leaders of today, because it will help you develop as a thinker, but also think about how you can then maybe reciprocate that in terms of giving your own time as a young thinker, but also the way when you are in a leadership position one day, also make a note of examples of leaders that you've really gravitated towards or learned a lot from, because you can then instill those in the next generation as well.
Super important. So learning by giving was our topic today. Let's bring it to an end. So what else do we need to add? Anything we have missed?
So I'm going to put us both a bit on the spot here quickly, and I'm going to say let's sum up our biggest takeaway in one sentence from the conversation today.
Ooh, collaboration. I can even stick to one word. Collaborate. Really do that with the intention of giving. That's what I learned, and I would like everyone to take away as well. What about you?
Cool. So I'll stick with your one word, because I put you on the spot, and then you decided to take it up a level further. So my word today is time, and the sentence that I'll string around that is around when we think about giving. So often we think about it in a tangible form, whether that be money or something physical that we're giving away. And how can we rather think about giving time towards a cause or to a person to help them develop, and then contributing to something that is often, far bigger than ourselves inside of that space.
Yeah. Awesome. So for everyone watching this or listening to the audio recording, head over to the XYZ Playground. That's the place where we will feature more and more of this thinking. And it's really meant to be a playground where we engage with each other, where we engage the leaders of today and the leaders of tomorrow, and bring you together. So head over to the xyzplayground.com and see you in the next Reverse Mentors Friday, next Friday. Thanks, Joshua. Was great. See you on the other side. Cheers.
Ciao. Bye.